Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our beloved, noble, unrivaled Master, Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice, and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. We're continuing in the book, the Hadrami Introduction, Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, which is a introductory text in Shafi'i fiqh written by the Allama Bafadul rahimahullah. We've made it to page 42 in the book. We've made it to page 42 in the book. The section called The Conditions of Salah. So in this section, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, is going to mention some of the conditions of a salat. Okay, and the conditions of salat are different from the pillars of the salat, or the obligations of the salat, or the integrals of the salat. Different books would translate it in different ways. But the integrals / pillars / obligations of the salat are the parts of the salat. They're parts of the actual act of salat. And those are the parts that make the salat a salat. That's why they're called the obligations or the pillars of the salat. Meaning if you fail to do one of those pillars properly, then you failed to perform the salat, period. Okay, that's what the pillars are. But this chapter that we're starting isn't about the pillars. We already talked about the pillars of the salat. Here we're talking about the conditions. And when we say condition, what do we mean when we say a condition? We mean something which is not part of the action that you're doing. So when we say conditions of salat, we're talking about things that are actually not part of the salat. Okay, they're not a part of the salat, but if these conditions are not met, then your salat will not be valid. Okay, so these are things that are not part of the salat, but still you have to do them. And because they're a condition, it means these conditions have to be true from the beginning of the salat all the way until the end of the salat. If at any point in the salat, one of these conditions is no longer true, then that means your salat is broken and it will not count. Okay, just as important as it is for you to know the parts of the salat that are obligatory for you to do, it's just as important for you to know the conditions of the salat, the things that are not part of the salat, but they have to be true in order for your salat to count. Okay, and the author of this book, may Allah have mercy on him, he followed one method that many of the Shafi'i scholars follow, which is to consider the conditions of the salat and the invalidators of the salat, to put both of them under the heading of conditions. Okay, so there's certain things you have to do in order for your salat to be valid. These are conditions. And there's certain things you have to avoid doing in order for your salat to be valid. Those are invalidators. Some scholars list the conditions and the invalidators in separate chapters. Okay. So, for example, in my book, The Seven Hadith, you'll see it like that. The invalidators are listed separately from the conditions. And I followed the example of Sulam Tawfiq, the ladder to success. But in this book and many other books in the madhab, they put the conditions and the invalidators together. Because in reality, the things that break the salat because a condition is no longer met. That's why the salat gets broken when you do certain things. So in reality, the invalidators of salat are actually conditions. But whereas a normal condition is something you have to do, the invalidators are something where it's a condition that you not do them. Inshallah, so this chapter has a pretty long list of conditions. We'll start with the simple ones. It says the conditions of salah are: number one, Islam. So the first condition of the salat is Islam, meaning that the one who's performing the salat must be a Muslim. Okay, he must meet the condition of being in Islam. So what we understand from that is that if a person is a kafir, okay, if they're outside of Islam, then they cannot perform a valid salat. Even if they know how to perform a salat in the proper way, even if they line up in the row with the other Muslims and they're praying behind the imam and they're doing what appears to be a salat, if they're not actually a Muslim, then what they did is not a salat. It will not count. Okay, because they don't meet the condition. In order for your salat to be valid, the condition is that the one doing the salat must be a Muslim. And remember, we said that conditions have to remain true from the first moment of the salat all the way to the last moment of the salat. So what that means is if a person leaves Islam in the middle of the salat, then the salat will be broken because he left Islam and one of the conditions is no longer met. Long story short, in order to do a valid salat, you have to be Muslim the whole time that you're praying. Number two, differentiation. What he calls differentiation, I normally translate as mental discrimination. But what that means is that the person needs to know what he's saying and doing. Okay, so it means that the person is sane. All right, if a person is insane, he doesn't even know what he's saying and doing because his mind is gone. That person does not have mental discrimination. Such a person cannot perform a valid salat, because how can you worship if you don't even know you're worshiping? Okay, if you don't know what you're doing, then this is not a valid salat. Similarly, if your mind is not fully developed yet. So sometimes some of us who have children, we have the experience of the child watching us make salat day in and day out. And so eventually the child will imitate us. You'll see the child standing and bowing and then going into sujood. Okay, but the child, I'm talking about a child that's maybe 2 years old, he doesn't know what that stuff is. He doesn't know that that's worship. He doesn't know who Allah is at that age. He doesn't know what to say when he's standing. You know, he might stand and put his hands like this, but he's not saying the Fatiha. Okay, this person, this child, he doesn't know what he's saying and doing yet. Okay, because his mind hasn't developed enough. Okay, he's so young that he hasn't reached the age of mental discrimination. And people reach the age of mental discrimination at different rates. Okay, some people, because they're like, you know, advanced, they might reach mental discrimination by age 4. Some people, because they're slower than others, may not reach mental discrimination until their teenage years or even into their 20s. But the typical person will be mentally discriminating by the time they're 7 lunar years old. 7 lunar years old is, about, it's less than 7 years of the solar years that we're used to. Normally by then a person will be mentally discriminating. But long story short, for condition number 2, if you don't have mental discrimination, you cannot perform a valid prayer. Number 3, the third condition of salat is entrance of the time. So any salat that has a time, such as Dhuhr or Asr or Maghrib or Isha or Fajr or Ad-Duha, etc., any salat that has a time, then the salat will not count if you perform that prayer before its time has come in, because the entrance of the time is a condition. So if someone says, oh man, I have such a busy day at work, I'm not going to have a chance to pray Dhuhr during Dhuhr time, but I got a few minutes right now, say it's like 20 minutes before Dhuhr comes in, he thinks, well, I got a few minutes right now, I'm gonna just pray Dhuhr now. Well, he can pray 4 rakahs, but it's not going to be Dhuhr. Okay, if he prays those rakahs before the time comes in and he intends for them to be Dhuhr, but the time is not in yet, then that salat is simply not valid. It doesn't count. Okay, because the condition of the salat is that its time is in, if the salat has a time. Furthermore, the condition isn't simply that the time is in, rather that you, the one who's praying the prayer, have determined that the time is in based on some form of evidence. And we talked about this a few chapters ago. You need to know that the time is in, like either know it for certain or, believe that the time is in based on some kind of evidence. And when we talked about the prayer times, we talked about how you can look out the window and tell by looking at where the sun is and looking at where the shadows are and looking at how much light is in the sky, whether the salat time is in or not. If you haven't taken the steps to actually go and gather evidence, meaning you looked out the window, or maybe you were informed by someone who had knowledge that the time is in. We talked through all the different cases before. If you didn't, take those steps to gather evidence to confirm that the time is in, then that means your salat will not be valid. Okay, you have to know the time is in based on evidence. So it's not enough if you just said, I think it's in, based on nothing but just a whim. You say, I think it's in. So you go and pray. And then after you pray, you find out that actually the time was in. That's not going to save you. Your salat won't count. And you're going to have to pray it over again, because you started the salat without knowing that the time was in. Okay, and without having gathered evidence to confirm that the time is in. Inshallah, that's clear. This is something that a lot of people nowadays completely ignore. They don't know if the time is in because they didn't go look for any evidence. And you have people who they just do whatever their phone says. If their phone makes a takbir sound, they think, oh, okay, the time is in. Let me pray now. And they didn't even check, as if your phone is a trustworthy Muslim that's telling you based off of knowledge. No, this phone is just a machine. It's not trustworthy in and of itself. And it's giving you information based on calculations, not based on observation. So there's no evidence involved there. Need to be careful to follow the Sharia appropriately, insha'Allah ta'ala. Number 4, belief in its obligation. So the 4th condition for a salat is that if the salat is an obligatory salat, such as the 5 that we pray every day, if the salat is obligatory, then it is a condition that you know it's an obligation. in order for it to be valid. Okay, you need to know, you need to believe in your heart that the salat you're praying is an obligation upon you to pray. Otherwise, if you don't believe that, well, then the salat that you're praying is going to be a what we call a nafila, an extra prayer, supererogatory prayer, an optional prayer. Okay, if the salat actually is an obligation, it is a condition that you recognize that it's an obligation. You need to believe it, believe that it's an obligation, or else the salat will not be valid. Number 5 of the conditions of the salat. It's a condition that one doesn't believe that a pillar of its pillars, it says being recommended, should say one doesn't believe that a pillar of its pillars is recommended. That's being should say is. So just like it's a condition that you believe that the entire salat is an obligation, talking about the 5 obligatory prayers, it's also a condition for any salat, whether it's obligatory or not obligatory. It is a condition that you recognize that the pillars of the salat are in fact pillars of the salat. Okay, that in order for your salat to be valid, you must do each one of those pillars correctly. So you must believe, how do I put this? So in order for the salat to be valid, you must A, perform the pillars correctly, but you must also, in order to fulfill this condition, you must also believe in your heart that the pillars are pillars. So if you believe that any one of the pillars of the salat is actually something optional, then your salat will not be valid. Okay. If you believe that something in the salat which is obligatory is optional, then your salat is not valid. I'm going to say it again. If you believe that a pillar is optional, then your salat is not valid. Okay, what about somebody who believes everything in the prayer is obligatory? They believe all the pillars are obligatory, but then the things that are optional, they think those things are obligatory too. They just think everything is obligatory. This person, his salat counts. His salat is valid. Okay, we're not saying he has to know the ruling of every aspect of the salat. Rather, what we're saying is the parts that are pillars, he needs to know they're obligatory. He needs to know that they are pillars. As for the things that are optional, it doesn't really matter if he considers them to be optional or if he considers them to be obligatory. The optional parts aren't the parts that the validity of the salat depend upon. The pillars are the parts that the validity of the salat depends upon. So you have to believe that those pillars are pillars. If you have questions, drop them in the box. I know that one probably for some people is a little bit tough. Number 6, it's a condition of salat to have purity from both ritual impurities. When they say both ritual impurities, what are they talking about? Both ritual impurities? What do they mean both? Well, the ritual impurities, or hadath in Arabic, hadath is of 2 types. There's the lesser ritual impurity or minor ritual impurity, and then there's the greater ritual impurity or major ritual impurity. I remind you that the minor impurity is removed from your body by performing wudu, and the major impurity is removed from your body by performing ghusl. So in order for your salat to be valid, it's a condition that you are free from both of them, that you don't have minor impurity and you don't have major impurity on your body either, that both of them have been removed. To put it in regular common speech, you have wudu and you have ghusl. Right, it's a condition for your salat to be valid that you have wudu and you have ghusl. Okay, that's how the common people refer to it. But the scholars, the way that they would say it is that you are pure from minor hadath and major hadath. Then he says, if it overwhelms one, the salah is void. What does that mean, overwhelms one? It means like if you're in the salat and you're trying to keep your wudu, but it overwhelmed you, like you broke your wudu, even though you were trying not to let that gas out, it came out. That's what it means by overwhelming you. Like you couldn't stay in the state of wudu for the whole length of the prayer. In that case, what does he say? He says the salah is void. All right, your salat is now invalid if you break wudu during the salat. Because when we talk about conditions, what we mean is the conditions have to be true from the beginning of the salat all the way until the end. So you need to stay Muslim from the beginning of the salat until it's over. You need to have mental discrimination from the beginning of the salat until it's over. The prayer time has to come in before you begin the prayer, and it must be true, clear until the end of the prayer that the salat time was already in. Number 4, you need to believe that the salat is an obligation if it's an obligatory prayer. You need to believe that that salat is an obligation, and you need to continue to believe that for the whole salat. It's not enough if you believed it at the beginning and then stopped believing it in the middle. Number 5, you have to believe that the pillars are pillars. So if your belief about that changed in the middle, then your salat would be invalid. Number 6, you have to have wudu and you have to have ghusl. So if at some point in the middle of the salat you broke your wudu or you broke your ghusl, then that means you broke your salat. The salat is not valid. Number 7, purity from physical impurity. Okay, this is najas or najasa. Okay, number 6 deals with ritual impurities. Hadath, which is a ritual impurity. This is not physical. It's not something you can actually see or feel on your body. Hadath. But for number 7, we're talking about physical impurities. Najas. These are actual physical things that can contaminate you. Things like urine and feces and alcohol and blood and vomit. Okay, these things, it's a condition that you be pure from those things. It says on one's clothes, body, and place. And as you'll see a little bit later, you also must be clear from najasa in anything that you're holding as well. What does this mean? It means that in order for your salat to count, your clothing must not be contaminated by najas, filth. And your body must not be contaminated by najas, filth. And the place that you're making the salat at, so any part of the ground that you're going to touch with your feet or with your knees or with your hands or with your face or with your clothing, any part of the ground that you're going to touch during the salat must also be free of najas, filth. It says, if part of one's body or clothes become impure and one isn't aware where it is, then it is a must to wash all of it without asserting judgment. Okay, what does that mean? So we said that if you want to make a valid salat, your clothing must not be contaminated by najas, filth. What happens if your clothing is contaminated by najas, filth? What do? You wash it. Okay, so say you had a shirt and a drop of filth, I don't know, a drop of urine somehow landed on your shirt. Are you going to be able to make salat wearing that shirt? No, you're not. What do you have to do? You need to put the spot where the urine fell, you need to put it under running water and let the running water run over that spot until the urine is gone and the taste, color, and smell of the urine those things are also gone. Once all of that is gone, then we say your clothing has been purified from the najis filth, and now you can wear it in the salat. Why? Because you washed it. You removed the najis filth by pouring pure and purifying water on the spot until the filth was gone and its 3 traces were gone. The color, taste, and smell were also gone. This is called purifying that spot where the urine fell. So what the author is getting at here, where he says, if part of one's body or clothes become impure and one isn't aware where it is, then it is a must to wash all of it without asserting judgment. He's saying, imagine that some filth fell onto your clothing, but you don't know exactly where it landed on your clothing. You don't know where it was. Was it on the front of your shirt? Was it on the back of your shirt? Was it near the top of your shirt? Was it near the bottom of the shirt? You don't know where it landed on the shirt. All you know is it landed on your shirt. That's all you know. You know for sure that it landed on the shirt, but you don't know where. In this case, the author is saying what your obligation is to wash the entire shirt. You wash the whole shirt, every part of it, the entirety of the shirt, then you know that the filth has been removed. Because wherever the filth was, it got washed. Because you didn't miss any spots. You washed the entire shirt. Okay? You wash the entire shirt. He says, and you don't assert judgment. Okay? You do not make any attempt to guess where it is. You do not make any attempt to say, for example, you know what? I'm pretty sure it was in the bottom half of the shirt. So therefore, I'm going to just wash the bottom half. You don't do that. You wash the entire shirt. And this is because asserting judgment, or ijtihad, as it's called, can only be done when there's 2 options, when there's 2 things. Okay, an easy example to help you understand what's meant by ijtihad here. It's like, imagine that there were 2 buckets. Imagine you had 2 buckets of water. And this is water that you use for wudu, for example. And one day when you're out working in the field, you see a dog walk by and drink out of one of those buckets. You saw it with your eyes. So you know a dog drank out of one of those buckets. And so you know for sure that one of those buckets is now contaminated with najis filth. You know for sure that one of them is contaminated with najis filth. But when the salat time came and you needed to go make your wudu, you realize you don't remember which one the dog drank from. Did he drink from the one on the right, or did he drink from the one on the left? You can't remember. You know he drank from one of them, but you're not sure which one. In this situation, you do something called ijtihad, asserting judgment. What you do is you look for evidence that might indicate which bucket the dog drank from. And based on the evidence that you find, you'll draw a conclusion about which bucket is the contaminated one. So for example, you might look for splashes of water on the ground beside one bucket, but not beside the other one. Or you might look for like a dog print, a paw print in the ground near one of the buckets to indicate that the dog went to that bucket. Okay, you look for some kind of evidence, and based on the evidence, you will conclude which bucket was the contaminated one, and then you build your practice of the deen, your Islamic practice, you build it upon that judgment that you derived using evidence. So if you saw, for example, a dog print next to one of the buckets and not next to the other one, you might conclude, okay, that bucket there is the one the dog drank from. That means the water in that bucket is contaminated. So I'm going to make my wudu from the other bucket. And you make your wudu from the other bucket and then you pray. This is called asserting judgment. Okay. And there are times when even regular Muslims like us make ijtihad of this sort. This isn't the same kind of ijtihad that Imam Shafi'i used to establish his madhab. Okay, that was a much more involved type of ijtihad. But this is like a lesser type of ijtihad, which any Muslim might occasionally need to do. But the condition of doing ijtihad is that there have to be two options. So in the example I gave, there were two buckets. And his ijtihad was to determine which one is contaminated. Okay, that was what he was asserting judgment in order to answer that question, which one is contaminated? And he had two options. Whereas the case that's mentioned in this book here that we're reading is the case where some najasa fell on your garment and you don't know where it fell on the garment. In this example, how many garments are there? Just one. In order for you to assert judgment, there has to be at least two. So because there's only one garment, you do not have the right to assert judgment and try to guess based on some kind of evidence where the najasa landed on your garment. You don't have the right to do that. If you don't know exactly where it landed, then your obligation is to wash the entire garment. You wash the whole thing. Okay, you wash what? The whole thing. This is what it means when he says, if part of one's body or clothes become impure and one isn't aware where it is, then it is a must to wash all of it without asserting judgment. You do not try to make your best guess about where it is such that you would only wash that part of the garment. No, you wash the whole garment. If you got filth on your body and you're not sure where it landed on your body, then you wash your whole body. You don't say, well, maybe it was there. No, you wash your whole body if you don't know. Let's talk more about this issue of najasa. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, if one washes half of something which has become impure, then the remainder, okay, he's saying if one washes half of something which has become impure, then the remainder. All right, so what's the situation he's talking about? Imagine you have a shirt, okay, and the shirt became impure. All right, somebody threw your shirt in the toilet, and you pull the shirt out, the whole thing is filthy. All right, the entire shirt is filthy now. The entire shirt is contaminated. He's saying, if you take that shirt and you wash half of it, okay, say you wash the right half of the shirt, and then after you wash the right half, then you washed the left half. You wash the rest of it later. You did the right half first, and you did the left half second. That's the case he's talking about here. He says, if one washes half of something which has become impure, then the remainder. So you wash half of it first, and then at a later time, you wash the other half. What's the situation here? He says, all has become pure if one has washed what is adjacent. Otherwise, he says the other half, what he really means is otherwise the center remains as it is impure. Remains as it is. You might want to put a comma after the word is. remains as it is, impure. So let's talk through the case here. Let's talk through what it means. He's saying if you have, let's go back to the shirt example, where you wash the right half of it, and then you wash the left half of it. He says, in this case, the entire shirt is now clean because you washed right half and then left half. Didn't you wash the whole thing? He said the entire shirt is clean if you washed the border of it again. The border, the edge. What do I mean here? Let me be a bit more clear, inshallah. When you washed the right half of the shirt, there was an edge to the part that you washed. Like you washed the right half up until like the midpoint of the shirt. You wash the right half, and then there's an edge. There's a part that is the edge of what you washed. And because it's moist, right, when you wash the right half, the shirt became wet. And so the edge of what you washed, because it's wet, it gets contaminated by the fact that it's touching the left side of the shirt, which you have not yet washed. The left side is still contaminated. So the edge of the right side, even though you washed it, the edge of it got recontaminated because it's adjacent to the left side. And so when you come back later to wash the left side, you have to make sure you also wash that border, the edge of what you washed the first time. Because if you don't rewash the edge, then what will happen? Then you're going to clean the left side of the shirt, and that edge, that border that's down the middle of the shirt will still be impure. It'll still be contaminated. Because even though you washed it the first time, it got contaminated by the unwashed part that was right next to it, and you didn't wash it again after that. This is why he's saying here, if one washes half of something which has become impure, then the remainder, all has become pure if one has washed what is adjacent. Otherwise, the center remains as it is, impure. So he's saying that center line, the border between the right half and the left half, that border became impure after you washed it. And since you didn't rewash it, it remains as it is, impure. See, most of us didn't think in this much detail about these kind of issues, but this is why we study books like this. In this book, it's for beginners. It's not actually very detailed, but it does open the eyes of the student to certain issues that maybe they wouldn't have considered. Somebody said, Shaykh, if the person doesn't know if the garment has najasa on it, then why wash the garment? Okay, so he's right. Yes, if you don't know that there's najasa on your garment, then you should not assume that there is. Okay, if you're not sure that najasa is on your garment, then you don't need to wash it at all. That's correct. But the case that we're talking about here in the book is the case where you do know for sure that there is najasa on your garment, but you don't know where on the garment. So you know your garment is contaminated, but you just don't know the exact spot that got contaminated. In that case, you wash the whole garment. And if in washing the whole garment, you decided to wash one half of it first and then the other half of it second, make sure that the dividing line between the two halves gets washed both times. That's what he's saying here. Okay, but the general case that we're discussing here is someone who knows that there's najasa on the garment. He just doesn't know where it is. That's a good question, brother. Very good question. Let's continue in the text. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, the salah isn't correct. And again, when he says correct, what he means is valid. Okay. The translator here, he sometimes translates words according to their uh, general linguistic meaning instead of according to the specific legal meaning. This is a book of Islamic law. It's a legal book. It's a book of fiqh, of Sharia. And so the words are used according to the terminology of fiqh. You know, in fiqh, when they say sahih, they mean valid. They don't mean correct. Okay, so when he says the salah isn't correct, he means the salah isn't valid for the one whose body or clothes are touching an impurity, even if it doesn't move with one's movement. So he's saying that if in the course of your salat, some part of your body touches najasa, or some part of your clothing touches najasa, then this means your salat is broken. It's over. You got to start the salat over again. And this can happen when you're out praying in random places. You know, there have been many times where salat time came in and I just made salat wherever I happen to be. You know, like if I'm out in public, you know, maybe I try to go somewhere off to the side where there won't be a lot of people walking by and I won't be blocking the whole sidewalk. You know, maybe I go up against the side of a building, for example, so that I can make salat. And frequently, when you're making salat near the side of a building, you see bird droppings on the ground. It happens, you know. But if that's the place where you're going to make salat, you need to make sure that neither your body nor your clothing touches any of those bird droppings. Okay, so you just need to make sure that you don't touch it. It's okay if your hands are on the ground and your chest is up in the air and there's a bird dropping below your chest. That doesn't matter. Your body's not touching it. Your clothes aren't touching it. So it's not going to invalidate your salat. Your salat will become invalid if your body touches najasa or if your clothing touches najasa. It says, even if it doesn't move with one's movement. You know, earlier in the book, we were talking about sujood, right? And we said that when you make sujood, you have to make sure there's nothing between your forehead and the surface that you're praying on. And the key distinction was whether this thing moves when you move. So if you put down a prayer rug, for example, that prayer rug is going to stay on the ground where it is when you stand up. After you make your sujood, when you stand up, the prayer rug is going to stay on the ground. So it does not move when you move. That means the prayer rug is the surface you're praying on. So it's okay to use a prayer rug. You just can't have a barrier between your forehead and the rug. The rug counts as the ground because it does not move when you move. I gave the example of someone wearing a necktie. A man who wears a necktie, when he goes to make sujood, very often the tie is going to hit the ground and wind up being on the ground right in the place where he needs to put his forehead. And if he puts his forehead on top of his tie, which is on top of his rug, then that sujood will not count, right? Because there's a barrier now between his forehead and the surface he's praying on. The tie is considered a barrier. Why? Because the tie moves when he moves. When he stands up from sujood, the tie is going to go up with him. So therefore, that tie does not count as the surface he's making salat on. It counts as clothing that he's wearing. It moves when he moves, and so therefore it cannot be between his forehead and the ground. Right? We talked about this, inshallah, when we were talking about making sujood. Here, he's making a reference to that. He's saying, don't get it twisted. Don't get it mixed up. Okay, when it comes to touching najasa, it doesn't matter if it moves when you move or not. You cannot come into contact with najasa during the salat. Not your body and not your clothes. You can't touch it. Even if it's going to stay where it is when you stand up, if you touched it, it breaks your salat. So what did we say? If your body touches the filth, Or if your clothing touches the filth, then it'll break your salat. He says, nor the salah of one who holds onto an end of a rope which joins an impurity. Okay, so here we're talking about that which you're holding, like you're holding it. Maybe you're grasping it in your hand, or maybe you have it like draped over your arm and you got your arm up to hold it in place so it doesn't fall. But you're doing something to support that rope. Well, if you're holding a rope in your hand, or you have it draped over your arm or over your shoulder, or you're in some way holding it up, then we need to ask ourselves, is the other end of that rope touching something that's najasa? Because if some part of that rope is touching something that's najasa, then by holding it, you break your salat. You need to put the rope down and not pick it up during the salat. Someone asked, what about the prayer rug touching it? Okay, if the prayer rug is on top of filth, like say the example where you praying on the sidewalk and there's dried up bird poop on the sidewalk, and you put your prayer rug down on top of the bird poop, this will not break your salat, because your body and your clothing will be touching the rug, not touching the filth. Okay, so in this case, the place that you're praying on, which is the rug, is pure. The surface that you're touching is not contaminated, and so your salat will be fine. You just need to make sure that, your clothing, sometimes your clothes or your feet might stick out past the edge of the rug. So make sure it doesn't touch something that's najis. Let's go back to what we were saying about the rope. If you are holding a rope or somehow supporting a rope or something like a rope, it could be a chain, it could be a string, it could be a bottle, okay, but you're holding something, and the thing that you're holding is in contact with najis filth, that will break your salat. So an example would be like if you're making salat and you're holding on to a dog leash and the other end of the leash is attached to the dog. That will invalidate your salat because dogs are najis. Or say that you carry a handkerchief and you tried to burp and a little bit of vomit came up with your burp, you spit it in the handkerchief, you fold up the handkerchief, put it in your pocket. Because it's now being supported by you, because it's in your pocket, you're holding something that's connected to najis filth, because vomit is najis. This will invalidate your salat. You need to take that handkerchief out of your pocket, put it down someplace while you make your salat. So you won't be carrying it while you're doing your prayer. You understand? Inshallah, we understand. All right, make sure you're not holding on to something or supporting something or carrying something that's connected to najis filth. Top of page 43, he says, even if it doesn't move with one's movement. Okay, this actually is not the strong opinion. Okay, in the madhab, the strong opinion in the madhab is that if you're holding on to something like a rope or a chain, and there's another part of, not the part you're holding, but some other part of the rope is in contact with najasa, the strong opinion is, if as you move through the salat, if the part of the rope that's touching the najasa will move with your movements, then your salat is broken. Your salat is invalid. But if the part of the rope that's touching the najasa does not move with your movements, well, then your salat is not broken. Okay, so if that dog leash was very, very long and the dog was just laying down on the ground still, and as you did your salat, as you lifted your hands and you bowed and you lifted your hands, and as you went into sujood and sat and stood up, like the part of the leash that's moving is just the part between your hand and the ground. And then there's another section of the leash where the leash is just lying on the ground until it gets to the dog, and the part that's on the ground doesn't move as you move. Then according to the sound opinion, your salat is not broken in this case. It's the part of the rope that moves as you move. That's the part that matters. As long as that part is not in contact with najasa, then it won't affect your salat. That's the strong opinion of the Shafi'i school on this issue. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, then says, it doesn't affect being close to an impurity if one isn't touching it in one's bowing or other. He's saying, this is what I said a minute ago. As long as your body or clothing are not actually touching the najasa, then it's not going to affect your salat. Okay, it's not going to cause your salat to become invalid if just because you're close to najasa. All right, being close to it, even if it's underneath you, like the example I gave where when you're in sujood, you got your hands on the ground and your forehead on the ground, but your chest is up in the air, and underneath your chest on the ground, there's some bird poop there, but your body's not touching it and your clothing is not touching it, then your salat is fine. Okay, being close to najis filth does not break your salat, but actually coming into contact with it, with your body or with your clothing, or if something that moves when you move comes into contact with it, then that is what breaks your salat. Again, if you have questions, drop them in the box. I'll see how much further I can get today, inshallah. He says, it is an obligation to remove a tattoo if one doesn't fear a consequence of that resulting in tayammum. So he's going to mention the issue of tattoos here, because the ruling of the Sharia, at least in the Shafi'i madhab, is that the spot that has a tattoo, like say someone gets a tattoo here on their upper arm, that spot is contaminated with najis filth. And this is because of the way tattoos work. Okay, when a person gets a tattoo, the needle goes into your skin and blood comes out, and then they put ink in that mixes with the blood, so this ink gets contaminated by the blood. Blood is najis. And then even after you heal and you wash it, the ink remains under your skin, contaminated with najis filth. So that spot where the tattoo was is filthy. And according to the Shafi'i madhab, you have an obligation to remove that tattoo as soon as you're able. You have an obligation to remove it as soon as you're able. And the exception to that obligation would be the case of someone who would be harmed by removing it. What kind of harm? The kind of harm that would permit you to make tayammum. Who remembers the 6 harms that allow you to make a tayammum instead of a wudu or a ghusl? We said if, in the case of wudu and ghusl, we said if using water will cause you to die or cause you to lose the use of an organ or cause you to become sick or cause an existing sickness to get worse or cause an existing sickness to last longer, or if it will cause a disfiguration in your face or hands, these are the cases where you'd be allowed to make tayammum instead of using water in your wudu and your ghusl. Well, similarly, for the one who has a tattoo, if removing the tattoo is going to kill him or will result in him losing the use of an organ, or if he will become sick, or if an existing sickness will get worse, or if an existing sickness will last longer, or if his face or his hands will become deformed, then in that case, we say he's not obligated to remove the tattoo because he'll be harmed by it. Okay? But if you're not in one of those situations, then you have an obligation to remove this tattoo. And according to the strongest opinion, once your tattoo is removed, you repray every salat that you prayed with the tattoo on. You repray them all. This is the strong saying in the Shafi'i school, but there are easier sayings outside of the Shafi'i school. So if any of you have tattoos, hopefully that you got before you became Muslim, just know that there is an easier saying outside of the madhab that you don't have to do all of that. Someone asked, what about when you fold up the prayer rug? So normally bird poop, unless it's very, very, very fresh, normally bird poop is dry, so it does not contaminate what it comes into contact with. Okay, remember, in order for najasa to contaminate something, moisture has to be present in one or the other item. Okay, so in the salat, simply touching that bird poop will invalidate the salat because of contact. But if say your pinky touched it, if your pinky was dry and the bird poop was dry, your pinky is not contaminated. Okay, you can just start your salat over again and make sure you don't touch it this time. You don't need to actually wash your finger because there was no moisture present. As long as there's no moisture, then the najasa doesn't contaminate what it touches. Most likely you'll be able in that case to pick up your rug and just shake it and get the little crumbs of bird poop off of it and then just fold it up. Typically that would be enough. If, however, the bird poop is fresh and still wet, well then yes, any spot that the rug touched, that spot would be contaminated and need to be washed. And if in folding it, if it was still moist when you folded it such that the wet spot touched another spot of the rug, then there'd be two places you need to wash. Okay, and if you can't remember exactly where those spots were, well then what do? You wash the whole thing, because you can't assert judgment when there's only one item. Any questions about the tattoo part? I know for some of you, some of these details are new. Okay, and it's important to understand these because some of us are in these situations. Some of us are in these situations, and we need to know how to react. The next paragraph, and please, I hope you're taking notes, because sometimes the wording of what he's saying, it's not clear what he means. So I hope you're taking notes to identify what he's actually referring to. Here he uses the word cleansing. When he says cleansing, what he really means is making istinja with stones or something like a stone. Okay, so say you went to the bathroom to make a bowel movement, and after your bowel movement, you wipe yourself with toilet paper until all of the feces was gone. Okay. And as long as it was 3 or more wipes, and as long as all of the feces is gone, then we say that you have cleaned the area, correct? We say you've cleaned the area. This is called istinja with stones. He says, the area of one's cleansing, meaning one's istinja with stones, is excused. Aha. Is excused. So he's going into detail here. Okay, a detail that maybe some of us didn't pick up on. If you wash your behind with water until all of the feces is gone, well then what's going to happen? The water will remove the feces and will also remove the traces of the feces, meaning the smell, color, and taste of it will also be removed. So if the feces and its three traces are all removed, well, then we say your behind has now been purified. You're in a state of purity. Similarly, if you use water on your front exit after you urinate, if you use water, well, then the water will remove the urine and will also remove the taste, color, and smell of the urine. So your front exit will also be purified if you use water for your istinja. But if you use stones or something like a stone, like say toilet paper, if you use toilet paper, remember that toilet paper and stones and things like that, they remove the physical mass of the filth, but they don't remove the traces. So if you wipe your behind with toilet paper and you don't use any water, that means you got the feces off, but the taste, color, and smell of the feces might still be there. Okay, because wiping with paper does not remove the traces, which means that wiping with paper does not actually purify the area because the traces are still there. And this is true if you wipe the front exit as well. When you wipe the front exit, the toilet paper can wipe away the urine, but the taste, color, and smell of the urine will remain because wiping with toilet paper does not remove the traces. So what that means is the place that you wiped with toilet paper is not actually pure. And because it's not actually pure, it can still contaminate other things. For example, if you wipe your behind with toilet paper and you don't use any water, and you drew yourself a nice bath in the bathtub, and then you sat in the bathtub, you contaminated all of that water. As soon as your behind, which you wiped with paper but didn't wash with water, as soon as your behind touched that water in the bathtub, you contaminated all of the water. And then every other part of your body that got touched by the water is now contaminated. Why? Because you didn't actually purify your behind when you wiped with the paper. What you did is you removed the physical mass of the filth, which is sufficient for you to make salat. But it's not sufficient to actually purify your behind. That's why he's saying here, let's open the book, page 43. He says, the area of one's cleansing, meaning where you did istinja with stones, is excused. Meaning that area is still filthy. It's not purified. Okay? It's still contaminated with the filth that came out of your body. But when it comes to the salat, that is excused. Those traces, the taste, color, and smell, okay, the traces that cannot be removed by wiping, those traces are excused. Your salat is still valid, even though those traces are there. So if you cleaned yourself after the bathroom by just wiping with toilet paper 3 or more times until all of the mass of the filth is gone, then this is enough for you to be able to make a salat. You can make a salat that way. But know that your behind is not actually purified, and your behind can still contaminate other things. Okay, but as far as the salat is concerned, it's excused. It's not going to impact the validity of your salat. You should also know that just like this place, like your butt crack and the area around where the urine comes out, just like this place, if you wiped with tissue, it would be excused in the salat. It would also be excused if sweat went into that place. So say you have a very demanding job, you work out in the heat, you work up a sweat, and because of your sweat, some sweat goes down your back and goes between your butt cheeks. That sweat gets contaminated by uh, like once it goes into the butt crack, it gets contaminated because when you wiped with the tissue, you didn't fully purify that area. Your sweat gets contaminated, but this contaminated sweat is also excused. It's also excused. So it's not going to impact your salat. But it can impact other things outside of the salat. Just making that clear. All right. What else is excused? So the area that you wiped with your toilet paper, that's excused in the salat. He says, as is the mud of the road, which one is certain of its impurity. Okay, so if I remember correctly, the word that's used here in the Arabic is teen, which doesn't really mean mud. Yeah, teen. So the teen here, it doesn't mean mud like wet dirt. Teen, it means like bricks, like a prepared surface. You know, in the past, sidewalks and streets and things used to be made of bricks. Sometimes like the small red bricks that we are accustomed to in America. Sometimes it was stones, like big, stones laid by masons. And, that's what he means. He doesn't mean mud like wet dirt. He means the street, the pavement, the road, the place that was built by human beings for people to walk on. If you have a spot like that, a spot on the sidewalk, and you know that that spot on the sidewalk is contaminated because you were outside one day in the rain and you saw a puddle in that spot and you saw a dog step into the puddle. So now you know that the dog contaminated that whole puddle and that area of the sidewalk is now contaminated with najis filth. You know it for certain because you saw it. What are we saying here? That spot is excused. It's excused. Okay, you can just walk down the sidewalk without worrying about whether this is the spot that the dog touched or that's the spot that the dog touched. You don't have to worry about that. You can just walk down the sidewalk. You can walk down the street. It's excused because otherwise it would be too difficult for a person to go down the street avoiding every single spot that was ever touched by, a dog that had wet feet or was every spot that had ever been pooped on by a bird or by some animal that went by. It would be too difficult to avoid it. And so for that reason, the roads and the streets, even if you know for sure that that spot was contaminated, it's still excused. That's why he says, but is usually difficult to shield oneself from. Actually, the Arabic text should not use the word, it doesn't use the word but. Okay, so I recommend that you scratch out the word but here, and in its place, write and what? And what? So what it should say is, as is the mud of the road, which one is certain of its impurity, meaning that's excused, and what is usually difficult to shield oneself from. And put a period there. Scratch out the word it at the start of the next line. So just like the road and the sidewalks, any filth that you are certain is there is excused, it's also excused any other thing that is typically very difficult to shield yourself from. Okay, it's typically very difficult for you to avoid. Like, for example, if you live in a place where there's a dirt road, every time a car drives by, it kicks up a whole cloud of dirt and dust. And maybe you know that that dirt is contaminated with filth, but it's too difficult for you to avoid the cloud of dust that's going to blow your way every time a car drives by. Okay, that cloud of dust is excused because it's too hard to avoid it. It's too hard to shield yourself from it. It's in the air. Okay, stuff like that is excused. If you have filth like that, that's just everywhere, all over the place, and it's way too difficult for you to avoid it, then it's going to be excused. Because Allah did not make our deen difficult. Okay, Allah did not make our deen difficult. So anything that would be very difficult to do, we're not required to do. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, then said, it differs depending on the time and its place on the clothes or body. So this notion that some things might be extremely difficult to shield yourself from, those things might shift depending on the season and depending on where you are in the world and depending on what part of your clothes or body you're talking about. So for example, if it's a season where it rains a lot, such as winter in some parts of the world or spring in other parts of the world, if you're in a season where it rains a lot, well, then the ground is going to frequently be wet, which means the bottoms of your shoes and maybe even the bottoms of your clothing, like the bottom of your thobe or the bottom of your pants, these things are going to get contaminated with whatever is on the ground because it's a rainy time of year. That kind of contamination is going to be excused because it's too difficult to avoid. Okay? But if it were in the dry time of the year, where it's not raining, hardly ever, where the ground is dry, well, then it'll be easy to avoid a puddle of water. Okay? If there's a part of the ground that's wet in the summertime when it's dry, if a part of the ground is wet, it's because somebody's sprinkler is running or something like that. Well, then you go around it. You go around the wet spot. Okay, because in that time of year, it would not be excused because it's easy for you to avoid that wet spot. But in the wet time of year, you can't avoid the ground. So things that would contaminate your feet or your shoes or the bottom of your garments will be excused in the wet season, not in the dry season. Meanwhile, whatever is on your sleeves or on your arms, it's not going to be excused in either season. Wet or dry, your sleeves and your arms have no business being down on the ground. Right? So those things are not going to be excused because it's easy to protect your arms and upper body from filth that's on the ground. Inshallah, that's understood. You should also understand from this that if you stumble and fall down onto the ground and so you get filth on the upper part of your garment, this is not excused. Okay, this is something you're going to have to rectify because it's your fault you fell. Okay, you should have been more careful. All right, that's not the case of something that's difficult to prevent from happening. It's quite easy to prevent yourself from falling. You just have to be careful. I think I'm going to stop there because we've gone on for quite some time. But we're not done yet with the list of najasa that's excused. Some types of filth are excused in the salat. Okay, if that filth is on you in the salat, it will not break your prayer. And we're still at the beginning of this list, inshallah. We'll complete more of it next time. If you have questions, drop them in the box. I will respond to questions now, inshallah. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. For those who salamed me. Someone asked, what if you only have a Kleenex or a small piece of paper to put your head on? I assume she's asking about like someone making salat who doesn't have a rug. So all they have is like a piece of Kleenex. They put it on the ground. They make salat on it. And then when they get up, the Kleenex, maybe it'll be stuck to their forehead and move with them. If that's the case, then do not put the Kleenex. Okay, just put your forehead on the ground, which is perfectly fine. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did his salats with his forehead straight on the ground. The Prophet's mosque at that time didn't even have a floor. If you walked into the mosque, it was dirt. There's a dirt floor, and everyone prayed with their forehead in the dirt. And their clothes got dirty when they made salat, and it's fine. Okay, it's not something we need to worry about. Okay, so if you just have something small, like a piece of Kleenex or a small piece of paper, then skip it. Make your sujood, put your forehead directly on the ground. It's okay if you get a little bit of dirt on your forehead. Just brush it off when the salat's finished. Someone asked, if you're outside and you're unable to wash your garment with the impurity, can you wait until you get home to make that prayer, even if the prayer time may go out? The answer is no. You must perform the salat on time, period. Okay, so you wash it when you're out. Certainly here nowadays in a country like the United States, if you're out and about, it's easy to find a bathroom. You can stop at a restaurant, at a Dunkin' Donuts. There are all kinds of places that have bathrooms. You go in the bathroom, you take off the garment that needs washing, and you wash it right there in the sink. Then you put it back on, even if it's wet when you put it back on, that's not a problem. Then you make salat before the time goes out. Okay, it's not, I know for some of us, we might feel embarrassed. We might think everyone's looking at us, and, you might feel a little humiliated or something like that. But, the person who has humility is a person that's going to have a higher status. And this is one of the examples of it. If you're humble enough to not let those things dissuade you, then what's going to happen? You're going to perform the salat on time. But if you're someone that worries so much about what other people are going to think or just don't want a lot of eyes on you, then the shaitan will use that to get you to do things that you should not do. And one thing you should never, ever, ever do is let the salat time go out without making the salat. Okay, pray on time, inshallah. And I think that's it. I think I answered the other questions. Okay, let's say La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. Barakallahu feekum. I'll see you next week, inshaAllah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.